Okay, this is a really good video to watch if you're working with any large flat surfaces. This isn't only exclusive to metallic paints, this can be used with a variety of matte paints, well, anything essentially. We've gone through this technique previously with the Janisha Kroll video, but this was actually painted before her. So this was my first experimentation into that. We start the process with some Negro Gold, Black Gold by Scale 75, and then we apply a layer of silver next to it, and we blend it together on the miniature itself. We are wet blending metallics here. This is one of my favourite techniques, especially when working with large, flat, open surfaces, like you get so much with the Horus Heresy miniatures, the gold filigree, etc. Here, I've just added a touch of Rhinox hide to the tip of the brush, and I'm blending that in as well, so towards the very ends. Now, when it comes to wet blending, it is essential, or it's something we need to keep in mind, that we don't actually want the paint to be dripping wet. So when we apply it to the surface, it should still be malleable. If you wipe your brush across it, it will remove the paint. We need to allow it to dry a little bit further until it kind of becomes turgid, a bit like how blood dries. It doesn't dry. When it begins to dry, it gets tacky, and you can still kind of move it around. That's where we need that kind of consistency, is how we apply the paint onto the surface of the miniature. So we don't need the paint to be completely and utterly dry, nor do we want it overly wet on the surface. We need that midpoint between the two. So when we do move our brush across there, it should feel like mixing mud together on the surface. That's a phrase, by the way, I got from a friend who does oil portraiture paintings, that feels like sometimes he's just rubbing mud against one another. That fascinated me. So get that idea in your head that you are mixing the paints on the surface of the miniature itself. Wet blending technique, we aren't using layering at this stage. So once this paint has completely dried, it may look a bit unusual. Some of the blends may have faded. Some things that look very strong at this stage may fade away. That's when the glaze stage comes in. Essentially, this wet blend stage I'm using as a sketch. Later on, I will go on to refine it with layering techniques, and I'll also use glazes to deepen the effect. If you have trouble figuring out where to place your shadows and highlights on the metallic surface, I refer you back to the PDF tutorial, Non-Metallic Metals. I know it feels a bit unusual recommending a non-metallic technique for true metallics, but understanding how light and shadow form on the surface will help you in determining where to place your shadows and highlights with a true metallic surface as well. And we can be so we're working on a smaller surface area here. Same process, Negro Gold first, Silver, wet blend. I'm not being too careful. I want big expressive brush strokes at this stage. Later on I can refine them, I can tidy them up. For now I want to be big, I want to be bold, I want to be powerful. So when the paint is still wet, I should be grabbing a touch of Rhinoxide. I hope Past Me does that. Yeah, there you go. Past Me's a genius. The Rhinoxide we're using here. Again, placing it into the shadows to give a realistic shine. If you are still unsure where to place your shadows and highlights, add a base layer of a metallic, Negro Gold in this case, hold your miniature under a single strong light source, and then take a picture. This will give you an indication and an understanding of how light reflections work naturally on a metallic surface. Then you can construct your paint scheme around that photograph. Use that photograph as the scaffolding for your job going forward. Okay, the main event. So building up to this, the chest piece, I felt, well, this is actually the first time I tried this technique on this scale. So trying on the breastplate was a kind of test to make sure it worked. So Negro Gold first, Silver from Vallejo Air secondly, and you can see the brush stroke I'm employing here. It's all going in one direction. It's consistent. I'm not moving the brush in circles, I'm not moving it in a different direction. It's all that horizontal slashing technique. So this will give a stronger indication of how this is a polished blade surface, kind of like a polished steel, well, in this case polished gold, where it's been tempered, it's been put through a manufacturing process that allows it to cut through armor. Now while the paint is still wet, I can move freely in between Negro Gold, Rhinoxide to help out the blends. The paint is still wet on here. As it's drying, I can keep this brush stroke going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth in order to develop the blends I want to. Okay, starting on the other side, I'm going very big here. So this light portion is slap bang up against the shadow portion on the other side of the blade. So start with Silver, then Negro Gold, and the ends I should blend together. There you go, so keeping that brush stroke consistent with the line of the sculpt, with the blade of the sculpt. Just take a touch more Negro Gold then, I'm mixing it onto the surface. So the silver in the middle is much, much brighter than the silver I placed on top of the Negro Gold in the first instance. You can tell I'm gaining confidence here because I'm not laying down a base layer first. So Rhinoxide again. And you'll go through a similar experience yourself. You'll think, oh god, I'm going to ruin this blade. And then it starts to work. Think, oh, okay, I'm onto something here. And you carry on building, you get bigger and you get bolder. And you end up with better painted miniatures. If you do try this technique, please send me some pictures. I'd love to see the results, anything that you do with them. And if you have any questions, because I'm sure there are things on here that I've done unconsciously that I may not be picking up on in the narration here. So if there are any questions that you have, please get in contact with me. That's what I'm here for. I'm a resource here for you to improve your miniature painting. I'm not here to show off, but I did show off a little bit there with the silver. So a very straight silver line to show an imperfection in the blade, or maybe a secondary highlight source just along there to help, well, make it look like a blade. Okay, I'm using Oro Imano Dwarven Gold at this stage, and this is more of a glaze consistency. So this is much thinner than my previous layers, and I'm overlapping this from the upper mid-tone to over the highlight. So I'll speed this section up here, and I'll get back to you when we come to do the glaze layers. So now that the paint is fully dried, we can see that there are a few imperfections in the blending process. In order to blend these together to give a smoother transition, I'm using Hull Red by Vallejo Air, and this is the air colour. Weirdly enough, if you look at this on the model colour index, it's slightly different. So I would suggest that you pick up the Model Air Hull Red. So I'd like you to pay attention to exactly how thin the paint is at this stage. It's practically dirty water. All those big transitional tones were done initially. Now we need to help the tones together, disparate tones together. So very, very thin glazes of paint, built one on top of another just to smooth the transitions out. And we should be using, well, practically dirty water at this stage. Multiple thin layers built up to something impressive. That's what we need to do. We could also, so I'm using silver at this stage to help define the lines of the sculpt a little bit more. So I'll be adding these onto the edges, either side of the blade, and running through the center. Now that the Hull Red has warmed up the gold, I want to give the impression of a blue sky above. So my favourite colour, Inky Darkness, comes in at this stage, and I use this as a wash in a few, well, just in a few places. And that is the tutorial for the blade. So as you can see, it's a relatively quick technique to go through, right? This doesn't take days or years in order to master. We just need to be very brave in those first transitional moves. Please, again, if you do practice this technique, if you do try this on anything, please send me pictures. I'd love to see what this spawns out there in the wild. Okay, thank you very much, and if you haven't heard it a million times already for me in this series of videos, Merry Christmas! Because this was a release during the Advent series. Catch you later, bye!